Let me go ahead and get started. I'm Palmer Holt. I'm founder and CEO of In Christ Communications. We're a faith-based Christian full spectrum communications agency based outside of Charlotte. If you're joining us for the first time, handle everything from branding to marketing to advertising, PR, crisis, social, digital, web. But we do a lot of crisis communications work. And that's sort of the genesis of this group. Which is called Crisis Connect, that grew out of this COVID-19 epidemic crisis. So I just want to welcome everybody to this webinar. If you're a first-time person or you come back for more, we're glad to have you, and thank you for taking your time out of your busy day to be with us. Let me just sort of open with prayer, and then we'll go ahead and get started. So, Father, we just come before you and present this time to you. We're glad that you're on the throne and we're not, and you're in charge. Your kingdom continues to come. We want to come with it. Lord, this crisis does not surprise you, nor does it fluster you or concern you. You have a way for us to navigate in it and through it for your glory, Lord. You said, why did this thing happen? What was the reason for this? It was that the glory of God might be revealed. So, in a sort of strange way, we sort of thank you for this crisis, because it does drive us into your arms and into your will. We know that you have this from the very beginning to the very end. So we commit this time to you. I ask you to bless it in Jesus' name. Amen. So again, just want to thank everybody for being here. I want to introduce a couple of folks who are on the screen with me. One is Diane Lonsdale. She's president of In Christ Communications. She is a branding, marketing, integrated communications architect, ad agency professional, lives in the Baltimore area. And then Marcy Grossman is our senior media relations strategist. She is in Chicago, and she has a very strong background. She's a television news reporter. She's been in corporate PR at Fortune 100 companies all of her life, had her own agency at one point, but really knows her way around news media. And she's going to make a presentation on media training for us today. So again, just to reiterate what the purpose of this group is, it's the Crisis Connect Network. What we try to do is bring together faith-based communications folks, marketing folks, development folks, sometimes executives, to communicate and collaborate in terms of communications best practices and challenges during this crisis that we're in. So if you haven't had a chance to sign up for these groups, go ahead and do that. And we have a weekly call every Monday at 2 p.m. Eastern. So that said, one other thing, if at some point we want to answer anybody's questions on this call, but if you have bigger issues and you want to talk further offline, we're happy to do that. We have free strategy sessions. So if you've got something that you want to talk about in detail, just feel free to contact us. You can go to our website and you can sign up there for a time, and we'll get back to you right away and try to get together with you. So that being said, I'm going to turn this over to Diane Lonsdale and let her facilitate the rest of the call. Thank you.
Okay, hello everyone. It's great to have you all on the meeting today. I hope some of you were here last week, but if you weren't, we're going to do just a little bit of a review. Last week we covered the SAFE process. The SAFE process is ICC's proprietary methodology for developing and managing crisis communications. And as part of that, we reviewed our ICC COVID-19 crisis communications checklist. Now, some of you did already download this. It's on our website, but if you didn't do that yet and you would like to, it's still available, and we'll put the URL up again at the end. We talked about why it's so important for an organization to manage and control their reputation. And we really talked about two major perspectives, the first being preparing for the worst. So as part of that, we discussed developing messaging, scripts, managing social media backlash, should you have that, designating and training a spokesperson or spokespersons, and preparing for the 8 critical questions that we often hear from the media. And then secondly, for managing trust and goodwill, writing, proactive messaging, for external audiences like the news media, preparing for media distribution lists, and understanding social media trends and storytelling and the importance of both of those. So today we're going to take a little closer look at sort of the how-to of one of the specific topics that we talked about last week, which is the element of media training. We know that today, you know, on an average day, on a good day, the media environment is extremely hectic. But in today's COVID-19 media environment, it has become even more so. Take one day in a week, last week, April 3rd, we found that in news outlets, there were over 650,000 news stories published about coronavirus, individual news stories. So your followers, your outreach recipients, your church congregants are being really bombarded by messaging, much of it having to do with COVID, and we need for your message to be heard, importantly, in that milieu. Messaging can be good or it can be bad. Here's some examples that we found just in a perusal of last week's media. This is one example of a positive story that appeared having to do with coronavirus, and this was from the Baptist Messenger. It appeared in Oklahoma. It was about Oklahoma Baptist Church, and their missions trip was canceled because of travel restrictions, their student missions trip. So what they did was they developed a program called Go Students Online Mission Project, and they announced that they were going to have a digital outreach effort in the wake of canceled trips. So this outreach effort is happening between April 5th and the 12th, and all of the students that were going to go on this missions trip are now doing an at-home evangelism project where they are all reaching out to their individual spheres of influence using social media and any other networks that they have, email, word of mouth, and they're still honoring God and spreading the gospel even in the midst of this crisis that's at hand. So that's an interesting story about how an organization was able to pivot and evolve their message in a very positive way. But sometimes the news isn't, as positive. Here's two examples from last week, one from Kentucky, one from Tennessee. In the first, a Kentucky county was really hard hit by a church revival that spread the COVID-19 virus. They didn't even realize this was done in March. No one realized that they had COVID at the time, the coronavirus. And as an outcome of that meeting, they were able to trace 28 cases of coronavirus and 2 deaths, and this was reported April 1st. And then likewise, this is on the right-hand side, my right-hand side, there's a Memphis pastor that had to explain through a news interview that his associate pastor had passed away due to complications from coronavirus. So whether the news is positive or in these sad cases where the news is negative, it's really incumbent on the communications professionals and the team to manage that and to interact with the media so that your ministry, your church is cast in the most positive light possible. So to do that, we have a very experienced navigator who's going to be talking to us about media training. Palmer already introduced Marcy, but this is a little bit more about her background. But at this point, I will turn it over to Marcy, and she will take over the media training from here.
Let me interject one thing. At the bottom of your screen, there'll be a little box that says Q&A. Use that to give us your questions. You may have come to the meeting with questions already. You may get some as Marcy makes her presentation, but feel free to post your questions there, and we'll address them at the end of Marcy's presentation. Thanks. Go ahead, Marcy.
Marcy, you're on mute.
Thank you all for tuning in today. I'm really glad to be here and part of the ICC team. I wish it was for better circumstances, but nonetheless, it's important to attend this session because you never know when you may have an opportunity to talk to the media. And you want to make sure that your individual members of your organization are trained, whether it's for a proactive or a reactive opportunity. So today I'm going to cover the following: the objectives of the media training, an intro to media relations, very high level. We don't expect you all to become media relations experts, but just some basic things for you to know and maybe you never thought about in terms of what news is, how the media works. Tips for successful media interviews. You watch the news, I'm sure everyone's watching a lot of it right now. You see politicians and other people do this in a very artful way where they really don't completely answer the question, but they pivot to their main point. Well, we're going to teach you how to do that in the short time that we have. And then, discuss key issues and potential threats or opportunities. That's really more for you guys to think about in your own organizations. And normally we would do on-camera interviews. We're not going to do that. And now we're going to go into the slides. All right, so today's objectives, I know that looks like a lot of things, but if you could take one or two things away from this after the training, then that's great. If you're going to do interviews, to at least be comfortable and feel prepared or more prepared to do an interview with the media, whether it's on COVID-19, whether it's on a proactive opportunity, or whether it's a crisis situation. Understand the media and how to work with the media, again, at a very high level. We're available to help you in a more in-depth way if you want that after this session. Effectively communicate your organization's messages during both proactive and reactive situations, and as Palmer likes to say, good news opportunities. Convey your organization's position on key issues, and this would be if there's a negative situation, want to make sure you understand how to inject not only your organization, but inject them in a proactive, positive way, so at least people think highly of your organization. Identify and communicate your company's key messages, how to show empathy during interviews, tell your organization's story, and be prepared for a crisis. There's an expression, I'm sure you've all heard it with many things. It's not a matter of if, but when a crisis will strike. Gain better understanding of the media, learn some techniques, and we're not going to be able to practice, but that's normally what we would do, and just prepare. So Hubert Humphrey said a long time ago, it's always a risk to speak to the press. They're likely to report what you say. That's true. It's not a risk. I see it as an opportunity, but you want to make sure that what you say is accurate and the right thing you want to say. So if you're going to speak to them, speak in the right way. So in today's media environment, the rise of soundbite journalism, I'm sure many of you have heard the expression soundbite. The average soundbite's 13 seconds, although these days it's getting shorter and shorter. There's a blurring between news and entertainment, and in today's world, you watch the news, you see things about celebrities all the time. Tom Hanks and his wife announced that they had COVID-19. That became, big news. The average person announcing it does not become big news. But at the same time, we can leverage those kinds of things to help further causes and messages. How does the media define news? Controversy, conflict, change, crisis, and celebrity. I added celebrity on there because they will cover something a celebrity does, even though it may not be newsworthy. I added crisis. This wasn't on my original list just because right now that's what's being covered. It's usually the three things: controversy, conflict, and change. Social media and smartphones have changed everything when it comes to news and how we get information. You've got citizen journalists. So they are putting out news all the time, people putting out their own videos, people starting their own video channels right now on YouTube. A lot of people first get their news, whether it's through LinkedIn or Facebook or just their phones. So a lot of things have really changed in the last several years with news. It's changed how people break news. It's changed how people get their news. I mean, you may remember a few years back, but when Robin Williams and Joan Rivers and others died, school shootings, airplane incidents, others, where do people get it? Usually from Facebook or their phones right off the bat. So in social media and media feed off each other. If something's happening from a social media standpoint that's going viral, it's going to become a news story, and vice versa with news. So what is news? What most people don't realize is news stands for north, south, east, and west. But what does it mean? Well, beyond that, I already talked about the C's. So we can go to the next slide. Reporters. Most reporters are skeptical by nature, and that's just the way they are. They don't always trust people who are providing news to them. But they are trained to get both sides of the story and make a balanced story. But to me, what is balanced? They may consider a balanced story a quote from the organization, but the whole rest of the article is negative. To me, that's more of a neutral story. It's definitely not balanced. They certainly still have their bias. They're trained to keep their personal biases out of stories, but if you watch the news a lot in certain channels, they don't do that. And most reporters, especially in today's world, are under a lot of pressure. They're in a hurry, they're juggling many stories and PR pitches. So in the old days, for those of you that were reading newspapers back then, most reporters had one deadline a day. They had the afternoon deadline for the newspaper that came out the next morning that was printed, and then online came. And now there's, whole digital sections of newspapers. So there's the whole online and digital part as well as the daily newspaper. So they have to write a lot of times for both, whether they're on the print side or the broadcast side. So things have changed. So they're juggling a lot more stories and a lot more pitches. And well, now they're not really leaving their desks that much, but they're slaves to their computers and the internet. They're lazy at times as well. So an important point to remember, people can be intimidated when they're doing an interview with a reporter, whether it's by phone or in person. Whatever you're interviewing with the reporter about, most likely you know a lot more than what that reporter knows. So remember, you're an expert, and that actually those reporters are less knowledgeable than you may be. They're often less organized, less friendly, and not always sometimes they're less cooperative, but we still have to deal with it. They're not always flexible with their deadlines. So the average reporter, this is just kind of trying to show you all the different things they're dealing with. They're driven by deadline. They want to be first, just like many companies, they have competitors. They're looking for the controversy. They're focused on their deadline. That's going to win over everything. They're overloaded with information. They're receiving lots of pitches from PR people like me. They're hungry for stories, examples, and analogies. And, it really varies by different audience and different outlet. But those are just, and they've got egos, a lot of them. 8 components of a news story. So this goes beyond what I talked about in terms of what media looks at for news. Change. So what's new, what's happening, what's different. So even in the world of COVID-19, if an organization, if your church or your ministry is doing something that's different, they may be interested in that. And if that's, whether it's good or bad. Timeliness, that's relevant. So right now, the media is mostly covering COVID-19. So somehow it's got to relate to it. The impact that it has on people, COVID-19 is impacting people across the world, just about every single country. And so there's the local, super local, national, global, all kinds of stories that are taking place. Prominence, we've seen a lot of that. Proximity, that doesn't apply so much other than reporters that are local are covering the story locally. Conflict and controversy, the unusual. So if there's anything your organization is doing, while we want to prepare you for any kind of crisis situation, we also want to prepare you to do an interview for good news stories as well. And then we talked about the others. So the psychology of interviews. This can make it easier if you're doing an interview. So instead of thinking about that there's thousands of people watching a television interview or ultimately reading an article, remember it's you, the person who's interviewing you, the reader, viewer, and listener, and just break it into those. And the person that you're talking to, whether you want to visualize one person in your head, it could be your mother or your child or your best friend or your teacher growing up or your pastor, but visualize someone so that it makes it more human. But remember, at the end of the day, you are actually talking to that reader, viewer, or listener. The interviewer is just the conduit to get the interview done. So remember your audience when you're doing the interview. It's a newspaper's duty to print the news and raise hell. So that was just something that the San Francisco Bay Guardian said many years ago. The 4 most dreaded words in the English language. Mike Wallace is here. 60 Minutes newspaper ad. Don't do interviews with 60 Minutes or Forbes. That's what I was told to tell Harvard Business School students, at least they used to. Preparing for an interview. So if you have a communications person on your team, likely they will do this, or if you have a PR agency, whether it's someone like In Christ or someone else, a lot of times they will do this. But from the time the reporter calls, you find out who they are, who the immediate outlet is, what their story is. You review any previous stories by that reporter so you can understand if it's a reporter you want to talk to or how you want to work with that reporter. Sometimes it can be an investigative reporter. Once you do research and you realize that's a red flag, we don't want to talk to them. How long is the interview going to last? What others have commented regarding the story? Who else is the reporter talking to for the story? What's the deadline? And when's the story going to air? Because you want to make sure that if you're providing information and it may not air or run for a couple of weeks, that it's still going to be current. Any questions to prepare for those tough questions ahead of time? Do practice interviews and develop briefing books to prepare your spokesperson. So if you're the communications person, that's something that you would do. Or if you're just serving in that role temporarily, just put together some kind of briefing document with all this information for whoever's going to do the interview. Reminder, and this is something that a lot of people, even people who are really experienced doing interviews, either don't know or often forget. You're not just there to answer the reporter's questions, you're there to make your points. Take advantage of the opportunity. PR equals opportunity. So what I mean by this is that you're there doing an interview, reporter asks questions. Most people, because in our nature, they ask us a question, we answer the question. It's really important that you go beyond answering that question. This is the most important thing that you can walk away with today. Because if you have that opportunity to do an interview, you want to make sure that you're not just there doing an interview and wasting your time, that you're getting messages across about your organization, because you have a chance to do that. That's what opportunity this is for you. And remember, as I said earlier, you know more about your organization or the subject matter, especially if it relates to your industry, than the reporter. So we talked about C's before. I'm going to talk about more C's, but this is about doing an interview. As I said, every interview is an opportunity. Telling your organization's story, communicating your messages, whether they're positive or negative situation. Take control of the interview. Basic groundwork, message preparation. So if you're going to do an interview and you don't have key messages for your organization, sit down with your key executives, with your communications person, whoever it is, quickly, and just come up with at least 3 messages of what you want to communicate in that interview, so that at the end of the day, when you've done that interview, you can say you got those messages across, and be redundant, say them over and over again. Because if you don't practice those messages and you don't determine what they are ahead of time, and you just go and wing it, you're going to be all over the place in doing your interview. And then it's not going to be strategic. This is your chance to tell your story. Define your agenda. Just like any other meeting or opportunity, you have an agenda going into this, and that is to get whatever those 3 messages are across. Anticipate questions that you can get asked and be prepared for those. Those could be the negative ones. Practice, practice, practice. And you want to be yourself, but if you have a dynamic personality, try to have that come through. Of course, if it's a sensitive situation and it's dealing with COVID-19 and deaths and things like that, then it's not a time to be charismatic, but a time to show empathy and caring. So getting across your messages. So determine 3 messages. Some organizations say 5, but for this case, I'm just trying to make it simple for you before the interview. Practice them, say them, weave them into every answer. This is your chance again. I'm going to say this over and over again to tell your organization stories. While there are 3 or more, determine what the single most important message you want to communicate is, and focus on that one first and often. And the reason I say that is because 3, maybe all of a sudden the microphone's on and you're answering questions and you're juggling a lot of things and you go, oh God, I can't remember every message. Remember 1, at least at a minimum, that 1 message that you want to get through in the interview, regardless of what question you're asked. And repeat the messages. There's a saying in advertising, repetition is good, and that's why you see ads over and over again. Well, when you're doing an interview, you want to say them over and over again, because you're going to get edited out, and you want as many messages to have that answer in there, so there's more likelihood that the reporter will include that, whether it's a taped interview or a quote for newspaper. Be simple and straightforward in your approach. Support with factual proof points. That means it could be data, it could be anecdotal information, any kind of facts to back up the point that you're making. And then just keep driving home your organization's key messages. That may be a mission of your organization. A lot of time can be a good key message. So I'm going to just quickly go through some key techniques, and these are the things that you see people doing when they do interviews. The first is blocking and bridging. It's what politicians do. The answer equals the question plus one of your key message points. Yes, our organization has employees and volunteers around the world. But today, here to talk about X, or you really want to make this point regarding, and I see some typos on there, I apologize for that. Blocking. What you want to do here is, the real issue here is this. So you get asked a question from a reporter, and you really don't want to answer it. So you say, the key point here, what I'm here to talk about, the bottom line here, say those points before your point, and you transition. So if you get asked something about your organization that's kind of negative or has nothing to do with COVID-19 or what you're talking about, what I really want to talk about here today is this. Our organization is doing XYZ. All right, next slide. Did something happen technically? You're mute, Diane. You're on mute.
I think you need to go back to share screen.
Yeah, the slide wasn't moving, so I'm trying to sign off and sign back.
Yeah.
Yeah, go to the next slide after that.
And folks, we've been having trouble with Zoom. You probably know Zoom is stressed and we get glitches, so apologies.
You're on blocking and bridging, right?
Yeah, go to the next one after blocking and bridging. Okay, yeah, that one's good. All right, are we, next one after that? Okay. Okay, hopefully we're back on and you guys can all hear us. So bridging, again, it's taking the discussion from unfriendly or friendly territory or from the irrelevant to the relevant. So it may not always be negative. It just may, have nothing to do with what your organization does or what you want to talk about. And this is what politicians do. Next time you watch the news, you'll probably notice it even more. And others do it besides politicians, but they're famous for it. So if you can walk away with two things from today's session, one, it's that you're in control of the interview and making sure you know your messages going into an interview and prepare for that. And two, that you bridge. You know how to take the message from whatever the topic is to your message. All right, headlining. This is kind of opposite of how we normally talk, because we usually talk leading up to a conclusion. In this case, you state your conclusion first. We want to accomplish this by. What we're announcing today is X company is a leader, X organization is a leader. Customers come first, our church members come first. Whatever it is, you say it, then you back it up, because that's the point that the reporter is going to be most interested in. Flagging, that's really just kind of, again, trying to take the interview to a different direction. And it's really to flag something. So someone's doing a news conference, and there's a lot of those right now. Our governor's been doing them every day, our mayor, I'm sure you're experiencing the same in your communities. And they're talking and talking and talking about what's going on, and they have their cabinet talking. Well, at some point, they may say, this is the most important thing I want to say today. What you really need to know, what you really need to understand. It's kind of putting that language in front of what you're saying, and that alerts the media to, oh, this is a key point I got to make sure I take note of. And even if it's not COVID-19, anytime you're doing an interview. So here's some quick do's and don'ts. I know it's a lot of things, but I did consolidate the list. But if you're doing an interview, and it may sound, again, unnatural, mention your organization in every answer that you can. And the reason being is that one quote will most likely come out of the interview. And you want that quote to not say, we are, because sometimes an organization isn't always identified correctly. You want it to say who your organization is, so you can get your name out there. Flag the key points, speak in easy to understand terms. Remember, whoever you're talking to isn't going to know your industry as well, or some of the jargon that you may use. Use facts and figures, anecdotes, stories, or analogies, and come prepared. And the next one is just being sensitive. These are some basics to reporters' deadlines. Be yourself, be concise, stay calm, smile when it's necessary, and again, using examples of data and other things. Interview don'ts. Don't be a slave to the questions. And what I mean by that is we're trained, as I said earlier, someone asks you a question, you answer. In this case, yes, you want to answer, but you want to make sure you bridge, that you don't just let the whole interview be them asking those questions and you never made your points. And it's harder to do than it seems. And this is the biggest challenge that most people have doing interviews. So please, if you can remember to answer the questions and bridge to your point, but don't over answer. Sometimes people get very verbose and they just keep talking and talking and talking. Don't fake any answers. If you don't know, don't guess. Don't assume the reporter knows about what you're talking about. And do not try to remember complicated things or be long-winded. If you have some data or numbers, maybe save those for later off camera or afterwards, but do not do it in a long television interview. All right, don't shake your head if you're doing a TV interview because they can videotape you and use that for something else. Don't talk off the record, don't lie, don't mention any of your competitors or even other ministries or anything else or churches because you don't want them to get coverage in your one soundbite. Don't use jargon and don't guess. So whatever your policy is, if you can't comment, basically whatever it is that you need to say, use that, as a company policy, as an organization policy. We don't talk about those things. All right, at the end of the interview, a lot of times a reporter will say, is there anything I didn't ask you? Are there any other questions or points you'd like to make? And a lot of people, if they haven't been coached this, will say, nope, I'm fine. I've covered everything. That's the wrong answer. This is a chance to communicate your key message, whether it's the one message that you've said throughout the interview or if it's a different message. And a lot of times a reporter will use this as your soundbite. All right, summary. Remember, review every interview as an opportunity. Identify goals and key message points. Organize your points in a concise, interesting, and provable manner. Repeat the key messages during the interview. Headline your points. And don't be fixated by questions that you forget to make your own points. All right, and next steps, if you're going to be preparing for any PR, these are some real basic things. Determine who your spokesperson is. Develop or adapt your key messages. Write lists of potential crisis scenarios or threats. Do formal media training. Develop a crisis communications plan. I think this situation has taught us that we should all have a plan in place. And also consider good news opportunities for your organization. So with that, I will open it up if anyone has questions.
I've got a couple of questions that I want to ask Marcy. Marcy, who makes the best spokesperson in an organization? What kind of person should that be? And would that be, say, in a faith-based nonprofit or a church?
So there's two answers to that question. If it's something that's kind of a good news story, you want to put your senior pastor or your executive director or someone pretty high up in the organization because it's good positioning for that person in that organization. If it's a negative situation in the beginning, you should try to respond with statements and not even really use a spokesperson other than to attribute it to. If you have to start doing interviews and the situation gets out of control, then at some point you need to bring in the CEO or the executive director of the organization. But in the beginning, I would not bring that person on board.
Right. Just a housekeeping question. Will the PowerPoint bullets be available for download on the website or in the groups after this webinar is completed? The answer is yes. All this material will be available so you can have access to it.
I tweak a couple of things from it, Palmer. It had some stuff from a different, from a previous agenda that we
okay. We'll tidy it up and post it in the next day or so. Got another question coming in. Marcy, what is newsjacking? And what does that mean and how is that used? Can you give some examples of that?
Yeah, newsjacking basically is actually what it sounds like. It's taking a story that is happening, and it could be on any topic, and inserting yourself into that story. So right now with COVID-19, it's finding a local angle that your organization is doing and inserting yourself into that story. But it can be also a number of things. It can be reports. Um, and it could be something that like maybe another church or ministry is doing on a normal basis, and you going and becoming part of that story and saying, wow, we've had this program that's even broader than that for years.
Right. So if something comes along and we're a bona fide subject matter expert in a particular area, we can interject ourselves into the conversation because we have the authority based on our skills or history or experience. So it's a lot of people do this around the country. You'll find something that happens, some sort of national level incident happens in some backwater place, and all of a sudden everybody shows up talking about it. That's got a dog in the fight. So it's a positive way, but you have to track the news to be able to interject yourself into it. So it's really important to stay on top of current events and look for opportunities when they open up.
Or have your PR firm do that. And once you want to be part of a newsjacking opportunity, then you can write an opinion piece, a pitch letter, a news release, or just call up reporters and pitch them on what your organization is doing.
By the way, if you hear barking dogs in the background, they're in my backyard. The postman's coming by, so I apologize. Working from home. Question, how many trained spokespersons should an organization have, and do they assume different roles by different types of interview or topic?
That's a hard question to answer. There's no clear answer. So here's what I would say. It depends how your organization is structured. If you're just, example, a local church, you really don't need too many spokespeople because you want to keep some control over who's out there providing the message. Unless you're doing a unique story about an activity for kids one day, and then that person who runs that activity is doing the story. If you're a ministry that's global, and you have offices across the country, then in that case, you would want to have someone, or across the world, you would want to have someone in those different countries or different cities to be spokespeople. So really is based on the structure of your organization and how big it is and how spread out you are.
Okay. Next question, how important is it to refer to the address of your website often in an interview?
You want to do it in a way that's not too commercial or too self-serving, but if it's information that you have that you feel is important for the public or important for your members, then it's okay to do that. But I wouldn't overly do it like you would in an ad. You'd kind of do it as, for more information about this particular issue or what we're doing as an organization, please visit our website, and then you can say it, but I wouldn't do it too much.
Another question, if someone has a positive news story, how do they go about being proactive about getting that information to the news media if they think they've got real news and it's good news?
Well, first, kind of do a little reality check. You might even want to ask someone outside of your organization if they find that interesting, because that's kind of a good test to see make sure it's not the old what's in it for me. And if you feel that's really the case, that you have a great story, then you figure how you're going to go to the media. If you don't have a list, you go online and you look up who your local TV stations or newspapers are. You write them a pitch letter, you can call them. They're getting flooded with pitches, but at the same time, they're all looking for news. Ratings are at an all-time high right now, so people and news stations are looking for news. I think it's probably harder to get a story in print right now than it is in the TV stations. Or of course, you hire a PR agency, or you have a PR agency that can help you with that as well.
Next question, if our organization has positive things it is doing now regarding COVID-19, should we go to the media with those positive story ideas?
Absolutely. But before you go to the media, make sure you're prepared. Make sure you know who your spokesperson is. Make sure you know how you're going to share that story with them. If there's an interview, and given these times, are they going to do the interview via Skype or via Zoom or via phone? And what visuals do you have to show them? If it's a visual story, a TV story, take some video, even if it's on an iPhone, and send it to them, or have them do it live from Zoom. So just have all your ducks in a row before you go to the media, and know when you're available or your spokesperson's available for that.
And if it comes to television, and that's to your primary, that's the best medium. Think in terms of pictures, because if they can't video, it doesn't exist to a television reporter. You know, they don't, talking heads doesn't cut it. They're looking for more than that. Here's an interesting question. Do lawyers need to review materials for the media and messaging?
So how I would answer that question is, you know, either you have in-house attorneys or outside of counsel, and they like to be involved with things. If it's the everyday stuff and you're just going to the media about a positive opportunity, no. If it has to do with a legal situation, then you may want them to review it, but I would not have your attorneys be the ones guiding and directing your PR strategies.
Right. I've had both positive and negative experiences with attorneys. In fact, a lot of crisis situations, we go through the attorney to work with the client so we can retain attorney-client privilege, because the last thing you want to do is, you know, have your PR firm hauled up to court. So we make sure everything's handled attorney-client privilege. That way we can talk freely and not have to worry, you know, so much about what we said to whom. Next question is, what's the best way to reach out to reporters? How do we find out who they are and get to them?
It's really easy. Wherever you live, you can just type in on Google, you know, media outlets in so-and-so community, or you can get specific TV stations in so-and-so community, and it will provide you usually the TV stations. It may provide you a number for the newsroom or a generic station number, and, you know, call them, email. These days, most reporters want stuff by email. So you want to send kind of a short, concise thing with a good subject matter in the headline and the email, and then you make a follow-up phone call. But I can tell you, if you call a lot of reporters right now, they're going to rush you off the phone. They'll probably be kind of short and probably even rude, almost like, well, don't you realize what's going on in the world right now? So if you do call them and they act like that, don't take that personally. That's just the nature of the beast.
They're like that on a good day, because the pressure's so great, and the time is down to the second. Next question, how can I get a story picked up by the national media?
Well, I guess it depends on the story. So I would have to know what that story is. And you want to make sure it fits all the criteria of what the national media is looking for. So it's got to be usually something really unique that no one else has done. It's got to have impact. It's got to be heartwarming, or it's got to be innovative, and kind of have those different categories. You know, what I would first do is try the local media, and then from there go to the national media.
Okay, thank you. Next question. How important is it to do on-camera practice in media training?
It's really important. And if you can't, you know, do a formal media training, at least take your phone, videotape yourself, have someone else videotape yourself. You know, it's kind of like when someone does a presentation and they go and speak before a large group of people, they're supposed to practice their presentation out loud and even look in the mirror. Don't just whisper it to yourself. It's not the same. You want to enunciate every word, practice saying those messages, because you may find that what's written on paper is not the way you speak, and you're not comfortable with that. But take the time to practice, 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 practice. I can't emphasize that enough.
What about the common media answer? A lot of people give, maybe mistakenly, no comment. Can you talk about what no comment, if you should use that or not?
No comment should really be in a really extreme situation. It can be a legal situation, a lawsuit. It can be a death of someone at your organization. But you want to go beyond no comment. You want to say, you know, as a matter of policy, our organization does not comment on XYZ. We don't release the names of our employees. We don't do this. We don't do that. Now, if, you know, God forbid, in this situation, someone in your organization gets the disease, you know, what I've been reading mostly in the paper is they're just saying, you know, an employee who works at Walmart or works here has come down with the disease or with COVID-19, they're not releasing names. So I would refrain from releasing names unless it's a really high, well-known public figure or someone, high up in your organization.
And I've got one more question for, at least for now. Again, folks, if you have a question, submit it in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. What if in the middle of an interview, I blow it and make a big mistake? What do I do?
That happens all the time. So if you're doing an interview with television or radio, and you kind of like just lose it in the middle, you lose your train of thought and you get stuck, they're recording you, as long as it's not live. You just say, you know what, I need to regroup. You take a deep breath and you start over. Don't try to fix what you said, just start all over. I was a television reporter. That happened to me all the time. I'm not looking to run the stuff to make someone bad. I'm looking to get my story and to get the best soundbite I can from that person. If you're doing it in a newspaper, you just do the same thing. If it's a print interview by phone, say, you know what, I didn't get off to a good start. I need to start all over. And then you just do that. And if you're not sure if some of the things you're saying are coming across the right way, or at the end of the interview, if you felt the reporter didn't grasp what you're saying, it's okay to go and clarify, say, you know what, I really want to go back to this one question and make sure that I was really clear in what I said. Can you just repeat back to me what you think I said, so that there's no issues afterwards. And it's also good to send an email afterwards to summarize some of your key points, again, so they know what you're trying to say.
Right. And then one more question, also two-part question. During this coronavirus epidemic, what are some potentially negative stories that we should be aware of or look out for? And what are some potentially positive news stories should we be on the lookout for and try to promote?
I think negative ones would be, these are just come to mind. If a church is going to go and defy all recommendations if there's a lockdown in their local community and still do services on Easter when they've basically been advised not to. That's a really negative story. If you're making your employees come to work every day when it's not a critical job and they can do their job remote, that can be a negative story. If you're not paying employees, and there's been all kinds of federal mandates that people have to get paid during this time if they get sick, that could be a negative story. Those are just some examples without knowing your organization or any specifics. What are positive stories? What people can be doing in your organization from a volunteer standpoint. If there's people in the hospital and there's art projects and you're doing special things for them. If there's a way that people are making hand sanitizer, making masks, doing anything that relates to it, donating money. If there's a collection that's going to raise money for local people or for local hospitals, or for employees who don't have their job, or for things that you need to do for a family that came down with the illness. Maybe the parents can't watch the kids and it's people in the community are doing something to help them. Those kind of things, those heartwarming stories, all those things that can relate to it in this given time, it goes beyond the medical support and medical need.
Okay, well, one more question. My director is not good on camera. Who would be the next best person to do media interviews?
Well, I'd have to know how your organization's structured, but sometimes it can be a director of marketing. If it's the executive director that you're talking about that's not good, it could be, the operations person. So it just really varies. Or if there's just someone in your organization that's just camera savvy or a good speaker, and they know your organization really well, then that could be that person.
Right. And what we do generally in a crisis situation is never use the CEO out of the gate. Use maybe the COO or somebody high up in the organization that understands the landscape and the scope, who's a good communicator and is fairly calm, because you want to save your CEO. If something goes wrong and you use your CEO out of the gate, you can't bring him in on a white horse to fix things, so or her. So that's why we use, and plus the CEO needs to be perceived as continuing to run the organization. Because when we were involved in the Ebola crisis with SIM, it went on for 4 months, and it wasn't too far into it where we realized that Bruce Johnson, the president, had to have some backup to handle it and sort of turn things over to, because he had an organization to run, and he couldn't be a full-time crisis communicator. So save your CEO for if you really need him or her when it comes to it. So any other closing comments, Marcy, Diane? I know that's sort of at a gallop kind of presentation, but again, it's all on video. You'll all be able to get it, and the information is gold. So any closing comments, Marcy or Diane?
Just remember, PR interviews is an opportunity for your organization, whether it's a negative situation or a positive situation. If it's a negative, it's to tell your story. And if it's positive, it's to tell your story in a good way.
Here's one thing I want to sort of interject too, last thought. When I was doing this, especially during the Ebola crisis, if I took the attitude with the media being a servant to them. I served them, I helped them. I helped them, get the information they needed, meet their deadlines, get interviews. And if you serve them and you serve them well, and you don't try to take credit for things, and you shoot straight with them, they'll appreciate you. They might not thank you effusively because they're proud people. They don't like to take handouts. They don't like to think, come across as being maybe manipulated by PR people, but they will, 9 times out of 10, you'll get if you treat them right and you serve them like the Lord wants us to serve people, they'll do right by you. You'll get the benefit of the doubt. Now, some of them, they're going to be jerks to the bone, but most of them are reasonable people. And if they know that they're under pressure and you end up helping them, they'll be very grateful to you inside, and you'll get the best out of them, and they'll come back for more good stuff later on. So, take this attitude of a servant, because they're just trying to do their job, and they got rough edges to them. If you had a gun to your head, all day long on deadlines, you'd be a little raw yourself. So anyhow. Enough about that, but Marcy, that was a great presentation. Thank you for doing that. So let me just
send any emails to Palmer and team if you have additional questions.
Yeah, we'll be happy to answer them. And again, if you want to offline have a strategy session with us, we're very welcome those opportunities. So let me just sort of close this all out here. I just again want to thank you for taking the time to be with us. Be sure, and if you haven't already done so, join the Facebook and LinkedIn groups. Use that as a forum to communicate, collaborate, invite other people to it. We'll have another call this time 2 p.m. Eastern next week. And I think that's probably about it. We're almost out of time. So again, we're not just doing this on Mondays. We're, the forum's open 24/7. Call us, email us if you need questions answered. So just go to inchristcommunications.com. That's INCHRST communications with an S.com. Okay. All right. Well, listen, have a great week, and keep praying. I'm hoping this will be over sooner than later, but they say it's going to be a rough next couple of weeks. But I think we're doing everything we can, and nobody ever saw this coming, and we just have to work our way through it. So thanks again for joining us. Lord bless.